yesterday's news.
Hello, welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. Well, another special for you this week. Wasn't what I planned, but that's the way things go sometimes. We're dipping into Here is the News again, the wonderful illustrated Manx history written by Terry Kringle, our own Terry Kringle among others. He of the Kringle File and Lord knows how many other wonderful programmes in Manx Radio over the years. And dipping into this, history written in a sort of modern style. We're going back almost 250 years, 1777. The visit of John Wesley, the leader of the people calling themselves Methodists, of course. He ended his visit to the Isle of Man today, we read, and the support and encouragement he had received from the Manx people had led him to believe that the island will be entered as a separate circuit at next year's Wesleyan Conference. He added that he hoped to return to the Isle of Man in the near future to see how well his work has made progress. We have this report, says Terry. It now seems that Methodism has gained a strong foothold in the island after many years of resistance and opposition from the established church, and there is no doubt that it has been the preaching of John Wesley during his visit that has won over many new adherents. It is now nearly 20 years since the first Methodist preacher arrived in the island. He was John Merlin, known as the Weeping Prophet, who arrived at Ramsey and stayed a week. But he departed, declaring that he believed he could do no good in what was a nest of smugglers. 2 years ago, the Methodist Church in Liverpool sent John Crook to Douglas to pursue the cause, and although he had some success, he also encountered official opposition and was even offered violence by a mob in Douglas, set on him by the minister of St Matthew's Church. The mind boggles. There's since been a pastoral letter to the clergy sent out by the Bishop of Sodor and Man condemning the Methodist preachers and their presence in the island, but this does not appear to have convinced all the clergy or Lieutenant Governor Richard Dawson. As a result, John Wesley was afforded a genuine welcome when he arrived in Douglas by sailing ship from Whitehaven earlier this week. During his stay, he preached throughout the island, notably at Castletown, where he spoke to a large concourse of people outside Castle Rushen. The monument's still there, of course. At Peel, he preached twice, once at 5 o'clock in the morning. Can you imagine there'd be a big crowd for that these days? And even then, he had a large and enthusiastic audience. Before leaving the island this morning, he said he had found the Manx people deeply serious but more lovingly simple-hearted than he'd found anywhere else in his travels. Which was no wonder, he added, because there were only 6 papists and no dissenters to be found in the island. The text of the Lord Bishop's pastoral letter on Methodism has just been published in full, and it is in severe terms. Bishop Richmond speaks of the crude, pragmatic and inconsistent, if not profane and blasphemous, extempore effusions of these pretenders to the true religion. He says his clergy should use their utmost endeavours to dissuade their flock from following or being led and misguided by such incompetent teachers. But many clergy have said they will ignore his lordship. A spokesman said they regarded his views as violent and intolerant. Difficult to believe religious matters could hold such sway on the Isle of Man now, isn't it, I think? But Methodism, still very much prominent on the Isle of Man, albeit some of the chapels might have disappeared over the years. A clash in the Keys. Now we're on to more familiar territory, aren't we? A clash between the Duke and Keys members, we read. There has been a clash between the House of Keys and the 4th Duke of Atholl over his continuing place in Manx affairs. It was the 3rd Duke who sold his family's sovereign rights as Lord of Man to the Crown of England in 1765. The present Duke, who succeeded him on his death 3 years ago, now alleges that the Keys have been obstructing him in his collection of the manorial dues in the island, which he says are still the right of his family to receive. The Duke has accused the Keys of being no more than the representative of the Manx people than of the people of Peru. Strong words indeed. We also read of emigration on the increase, people leaving the island. Well, it's something we've suffered numerous times, I think, over the history of the Isle of Man, and even now we struggle to bring more people into the island, it seems, and that's one of the current aims of our government at the moment. It's been estimated that well over 1,000 people have now left the Isle of Man in search of work because of the depressed conditions in the Manx economy following the so-called revestment of 12 years ago. Others are finding it difficult to live because prices are being forced to rise steeply. This ringing any bells? But there is encouraging news. There appears to be a major revival of the Manx fishing industry taking place after many men had abandoned it to join the smuggling trade, which resulted in revestment. Smuggling paid better in the day, of course. Exports of salted and pickled Manx herring are now going to Britain, France, Spain and Italy, and even to the Americas. Well, I think we do still export some fish. Certainly some of the shellfish goes out. And we do have a herring quota back. So maybe the fishing industry is on the ascendant again on the Isle of Man. Who knows? Militia to be reformed. The militia forces in the island are to be put back on a proper footing, and recruiting is expected to start shortly. A spokesman for the regular army garrison at Castle Rushen said the militia had fallen into such disarray that there were no longer watch and ward duties being carried out. There's also a lack of trained officers and of men capable of responding to military discipline. The spokesman said there was a need for an organised Manx military formation. Because of the present threat of war with France and Spain, it's proposed that the unit should be called the Royal Manx Fencibles. Should the Isle of Man have a military force, do you think? How would it go down now? Not well, would be my feeling. And finally, we read of the system of yarding to go. The reform of the old and often controversial system of taking men and women into employment by the more prosperous in the island, known as yarding, is contained in a new Act of Tynwald. This lays down that labourers and maidservants will no longer be obliged to enter employment only at certain times of the year and at certain fixed rates of pay. The intention is to create a more open employment market in the island. Critics of the yarding system says it's feudal and oppressive and typical of the many outdated laws that still apply in the Isle of Man. I dare say there will be those who think there are still outdated laws applying on the Isle of Man, and perhaps some things never change. However, I think the island perhaps a less religious place than it was some 250 years ago. Or is it just that there are more religions represented? Whichever way you look at it, it's always old news, as they say. Nothing new under the sun. Until next week, cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.